Hello, welcome to Black Britain and Beyond 2021. This is the final day in our 4-day symposium, exploring how we create a legacy of empowerment for the Black community in Britain and across the diaspora. The past 3 days have gone beyond our own ambitious expectations. We've witnessed some powerful testimonies and opinions from an extraordinary and eclectic mix of contributors, from entrepreneurs and economists, politicians and performers, legal, beauty, experts, all sharing valued experiences and opinions on a variety of subjects that resonate with our communities and touch our lives. We've had a deep dive into wealth creation and how Black people have been denied access to education, information, and opportunities. We've had panel discussions where brilliant minds have discussed Black masculinity, and esteemed lawyers have compared their work in the UK and the USA in the justice system. We've had hypnotic performances from award-winning singers and also an amazing, engaging performance from a queer performance artist. We've had open, authentic, genuinely heartfelt conversations and testimonies about the lived experiences of Black people in Britain, and that's just been in the first 3 days. Today we conclude our symposium with a focus on activism and Black British identity. We'll be exploring celebrity influence, personal participation, and corporate and institutional responsibility. We'll be discussing the rhetoric versus the right, the noise versus the need to empower people towards justice. The aim every day of the symposium has been to consistently consider radical, ambitious, forward-thinking solutions to creating a legacy of empowerment. So our esteemed guests will steer every conversation that we have today in that direction. We have a famed football sports star and personality, a leading diversity and media expert, and some brilliant young minds discussing candid conversations about justice beyond hashtags. We start with a keynote speaker who will set the tone for today. Our guest will masterfully lead us through thought-provoking, candid conversations about activism, starting with a conversation that's based on his new book, Black Lives Matter, a clarion call for equality. Marcus Ryder, MBE, has had over 25 years working in television and journalism. He's a leading voice on the issues of diversity and the media. He was previously chair of the Royal Television Society's Diversity Committee and head of the BBC Scotland's Current Affairs Department for over a decade. He's the recipient of a number of awards, and he's recently taken up the position of chair of RADA Council, the UK's leading drama school. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome, please, for Mr. Marcus Ryder, MBE.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning to everyone, brothers, sisters, cousins, friends, people online, people in real life. Today I have a simple question. What does it mean to be Black? And what does that mean to everything we do in our lives? That was a question Lenny Henry and I were trying to explore in the collection of essays we edited, Black British Lives Matter. Let's take the more famous part of the title of the book, Black Lives Matter. It's easy to say, but what does it mean? From starting as a simple hashtag in 2013, the phrase is now a political movement, but at its most basic, its power stems from its simplicity. Black lives must be valued and viewed as equal to those of any other race. It is a clarion call for equality. That's the subtitle of the book. However, often when we discuss the meaning of this phrase, we point to how our lives don't matter and are not valued. As a rallying call for equality, we highlight the examples of inequality. We draw attention to the overt and systematic racism we face as a people. The fact of the matter is, the racism we face in Britain is shocking. When it comes to Black mothers, we can point to the statistic that Black British women are 4 times more likely to die in pregnancy than white women. When it comes to education, Black British Caribbean children are twice as likely to be permanently excluded from school as white pupils. The UK Black unemployment rate is double that of our white counterparts. Black British people are over 4 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act. Black families are 5 times more likely to be officially homeless than white families. We earn less if you compare like for like. So black Londoners earn less than a fifth than white Londoners. And if you take the country as a whole, black and other ethnic minorities earn £3.10 billion less every year compared to their white counterparts. We are 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched by the police, which also means we are over 3 times more likely to be arrested. And when we are arrested, we are more likely to be denied bail if our case goes to court. If found guilty, we face 50% longer prison sentences. Finally, despite making up less than 5% of the population, nearly 1/3 of all deaths in police custody are black. And for the vast majority of us who do not die in police custody, we still disproportionately inhabit areas of the country with a shorter life expectancy. 9.2 years less for men and 7.1 years less for women. These facts and many others, which I could just reel off, bear repeating. Because too many people want to deny the depth of racism we face. We saw that denial following the Oprah Winfrey interview with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry in March last year in 2021, when the Society of Editors, a powerful media organisation representing the interests of the majority of Britain's national newspapers, issued a statement denying the existence of bigotry in the media, despite all the evidence to the contrary. A statement which they, in the end, due to public pressure, they reversed. We saw that denial in the British government-backed report by the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, published also in March last year, effectively gaslighting the black community by telling us that institutional racism doesn't exist. Again, due to public pressure, something else that they have effectively, I'll put it politely, clarified. So, we see that denial every time we look up at a statue of a former slaveholder and are told that we should celebrate the great history they represent and forget the history of what they did to our ancestors. In the struggle to ensure our lives matter, we must never forget the racism we have endured, especially in the face of people actively trying to deny it. But, all too often, pointing out racism is where the discussion ends. And for me, it does not answer the fundamental question I posed at the start. What does my blackness mean to me? Why is my blackness important to my identity? It only frames our blackness in terms of racism. Are we black, and does our blackness matter if we do not suffer racism? I don't believe that's true. I believe that my blackness is broader and larger than racism. I cannot accept an identity which is predicated on being a victim of racism. I do not want our lives to be portrayed as a negative, shaped by the very bigotry and prejudice that tries to constrain it. Recently, many people have pointed out the need to be anti-racist, as opposed to simply being non-racist. I think that's a good step forward. However, I still don't think that's enough. I recently talked with a South African student, and he pointed out the difference between being anti-apartheid versus Pan-Africanist. Anti-racism and anti-apartheid can center whiteness by concentrating on white people's actions and how they impact black people. On the other hand, Pan-Africanism, black consciousness, centers blackness, while at the same time trying to address racism. What we are trying to do in the book is center the black narrative, not center black oppression. The black narrative must encapsulate the impression that we experience, but that is not the sum total of our narrative. The book is an attempt to reframe the debate around Black Lives Matter, fully acknowledging the racism and its pernicious effects, but also articulating clearly why and how our lives are important. Black British people have unique perspectives and experiences that enrich British society and the world. Our lives are far more interesting and important than the forces that try to limit it. Let me give you just a few examples that are in the book between the difference between an anti-racism approach and a black-centric approach. In the UK, only 2.6% of British tech companies' board members are from ethnic minority backgrounds, despite the fact that black and ethnic minority people make up 14% of the population. While corresponding numbers of black people are not available, related figures are dire. Only 0.7% of university professors and 15% of the 445 people who graduated from postgraduate research degrees in computer science in 2018-19 were black. Now, an anti-racism approach merely seeks to address the lack of diversity. Chapter in the book, Black British Technologists Matter, asks, what do black technologists contribute that is fundamentally different to their white colleagues and counterparts? Similarly, we can talk about the structural racism that black people face in architecture, and we acknowledge the racism in the book. But in a thought-provoking essay by the world-famous architect Sir David Adjaye, responsible for the Stephen Lawrence Centre in London and the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., black British identity and David's diasporic identity shapes his approach to designing buildings. He is not merely a white architect who happens to have more melanin. His identity shapes his approach. Our buildings answer different questions as to how we want to work and live. Your identity is going to shape the questions you ask, and your buildings, and therefore your buildings, and it will also shape the answers that you come up with when answering those questions. Now, I could go on, but I think it's really important to get on with the panel discussion, so I'm going to skip through the fact that black historians matter. And it's what I want to stress, that when we talk about black historians matter, for example, this is not about looking at whether we can talk about quote-unquote black history more. This is about taking a different perspective on all types of history. I lived in China for 3 years. I have visited Russia. I am sure that we will be able to find black people who have lived in Russia and have lived in China, and their history is important. But if you're a historian who is recently coming out of 400 years of slavery, your perspective on Russian history and the serfdom that was taking place there will be quite different from a historian who does not have that close contact to slavery, irrespective of whether you're talking about people from African descent. You are going to contribute something different. We cannot just limit ourselves and our history or our thinking to think that we will only think about quote-unquote black things differently, or that we will only think about racism differently. We will think about the entire world differently. And that is what the book is about. It's about seeing the world through a black lens and what that contributes to the global good. Okay. The idea that our identities are bigger than just a reaction to racism, in some fields, is readily recognized, such as music and entertainment. For example, we can fully understand that if you give black people access to music, they produce different types of music. We understand that already, and it's not formed within a reaction to racism, or not directly. We need to recognize that in other fields, and we need to make sure that we don't think of it purely in terms of music and entertainment. Because in many ways, even that is shaped by racism, as it plays into a history of minstrelling and stereotypes us as being entertainers. Right? For all these reasons, it is important for us to explore what does it mean to be black, independent of a reaction to racism. But there is a natural tension. I was going to read a tiny passage from the book, but what I'd like to do, where I end up in the final chapter of the book, I detail an argument that I have with my wife. You know what? I'll do it very, very quickly. Let me just find it. Right. So this is just in 2021. I'm collecting the final completed essays for the anthology I'm editing with Lenny Henry on Black British Lives Matter. I'm worried. We do not have an essay that directly addresses police brutality of black people, possibly the core issue of the Black Lives Matter movement. Numerous essays touch on the issue, not least Black British Police Matter and Black British Lawyers Matter. Also, numerous essays discuss the murder of George Floyd and the parallels in Britain. But there isn't one that directly talks from the victim's perspective, from a black person's perspective. I'm eating breakfast. I tell my black British wife that I think we need an extra essay. We argue. I'm going to jump to the very end of the argument. Right. She says, when Stephen Lawrence was knifed to death, Doreen Lawrence did not set up an anti-knife charity. Doreen didn't even set up an anti-racism charity, my wife tells me. Doreen set up a charity for aspiring young architects because that was Stephen's ambition and that was the life that was cut short. That was the black British life that mattered. These essays focus on the architect of the future. They do not dwell on the knife. I respond. But this book is about capturing the unique experience of black British people, I reply. Police brutality is part of our reality. She finishes the argument. She's my wife, she has the last word, obviously. There is more to our reality, and it feels that is all I hear about. We finish our breakfast in silence. My wife is right. I was wrong. There is more to our reality than the racism that tries to limit us. I might have finished, and we might have finished our breakfast in silence, but we cannot be silent. We must speak about these issues. We must explore these issues. Thank you very much. I think we're now going to have a panel discussion, and I'd just like to call Amar Otashi. He's a second-year law student at the University of Warwick. He's also part of the Warwick think tank, which does policy research around global issues, most recently, obviously, COP26, but also looking at issues such as the racial wealth gap. So, Amar Otashi. And can I also just welcome Beverly Daniel Tatum, is a psychologist, administrator, and educator. She was the 9th president of Spelman College and the author of the best-selling book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? Thank you very much.
All right. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you very much, Black Britain and Beyond, for having me and inviting us. Thank you very much to Reverend Keith McGee for inviting me. But Marcus and Beverly, I suppose I'll start with two very broad questions. Following on from your speech, Marcus, I suppose I could address the question, why is it that being a challenger and visionary that you are, especially in your industry now for over 2 decades, why is it so easily why is it so easy to theoretically and verbally challenge the status quo of the Black identity, of the Black experience? Why is it so easy to challenge the institutions that have been set around us and that have defined our experiences, yet when it comes to actually manifesting Black community reform, we seem to struggle with that? Why do you think that is?
It's really easy, I guess, to explain that, and that's called structural racism. You know, trying to implement structural change and long-term change is difficult. To be a little bit glib about it, I'm sure that the very first slave off the slave ship was talking about how do we get these shackles off us. You know, it then took another 400 years to get the shackles off them. You know, but they didn't stop talking about it and didn't stop trying to get the shackles off them and what have you. So, we have to keep talking, we have to keep theorizing, but, you know, these things take a long time to achieve.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think as your book opens in this incredibly strong way with citing statistic after statistic, fact after fact, and the experiences of many who have contributed to your beautifully articulated piece, I think understanding that we can't deny that very blatant structural racism is step one. But I think, and as a member of a think tank myself, I think understanding how we manifest that reform and how we shape our experiences so that the people after us can carry on this legacy and actually affect change as time progresses. And that's where I'll ask you, Beverly. I suppose the first question is quite an obvious one, and it's on the cover of your book. Why is it that all the Black kids are still sitting together in the cafeteria? Is there a sort of fundamental reason why Black communities are still so glued together and sort of afraid in a way to break out of the shell? They feel like they can only turn to each other, which in many cases, due to, as Marcus mentioned, the structural racism, that can very much be the case. Is it a case of, as you mentioned in the book, residential segregation, for example? Is it a case because Black youths view themselves in a particular way that the rest of the world views themselves? And you use your son David as an example. So what is the answer to the question, or what is your opinion as to the answer to that question?
Sure. Well, I want to start by saying that I am a psychologist, and as I was listening to Marcus's opening remarks, I was thinking that what you were describing fit in a very clear way, in some ways, the individual's journey toward thinking about identity, which is very much related to your question, why are all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? Just thinking for a moment developmentally, in the States, this may be true also in Britain, but certainly in the US, if you walk into an elementary school, a racially mixed elementary school, you don't see all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria. They are mixing with their peers, their 7- and 8-year-old peers, 9-year-old peers. It's really as kids start approaching adolescence, 5th grade, 6th grade, into middle school, what we call middle school in the US, and then into secondary school, that you see that sitting together, and it coincides with questions of identity. Yeah. Who am I? What does it mean to be Black? You were asking that question collectively, but individually, what does it mean to be Black? And often, a young person starts to think about that question in response to an act of racism, meaning somebody calls you a name, or you have an encounter, or someone says you can't do something because you're Black, or your career ambition is not for you. There are lots of different ways society gives young Black people that message. And often the response is to say, oh, okay, I need to think about this. What does this mean for me? And it is, as you said, the start is in response perhaps to racism, but it doesn't end there. And when young people start to think, it's not just about racism, it's about who am I in the world and how do I want to define myself? And as I connect with my Black peers, I'm starting to get information, not just from the wider world, but also from them. In my experience as an educator, it's often when those young people get to college, if they do get to college, that they get access to information that is not just about Black oppression, but about Black creativity, Black literature, Black history, Black invention, access to information that wasn't previously available, and that leads to a redefinition of not just about responding to racism, but really defining in an empowering way what it means to be a young Black woman, young Black man, and sitting together in that context is about rejuvenation. It's about reinvigoration. It's about support and empowerment. So exactly what it means, why are they together? It depends developmentally where they are. It depends on the social context. But we shouldn't see it necessarily as a negative thing, but perhaps as a empowering thing that is to be celebrated.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think so. And I want to perhaps draw a little bit on your psychological expertise here, and also relating to the book. What is it about the Black mindset? And I'll come on to you, Marcus, about this. What is it about the Black mindset that has allowed it to be so mentally resistant? It's despite the fact that actual change has occurred, and we've seen decades. We've seen civil rights movements, we've seen many protests, we've effected some actual change, but there's still an incredibly deep dissatisfaction within Black communities, and for righteous reasons. And as Black Britain and Beyond's wealth creation report highlights, there's many reasons for that. So you mentioned in the book the complexity of identity and themes of domination and subordination, and despite that, how is it that the Black mindset has been so incredibly mentally resistant, and what does that say about Black identity?
It says we persist.
Absolutely, yeah.
And still she persisted. You know, the fact of the matter is that when we think about how can I put this? You know, when a friend of mine once said to me, if you make a lot of withdrawals, you better make a lot of deposits. And what does that mean? You know, it doesn't just mean, you know, if you're taking money out of your bank account, put more in, of course. But it also means that if you're in a difficult situation, you have to find ways to restore. And if we go back to that first enslaved person, you know, in the midst of that pain and struggle, there were still reasons for joy that could be found. And I think the focus on spirituality that is so clear within communities across the diaspora. I think it is that going to the well in that way that keeps people going. Yeah. You know, if you don't believe change is possible, you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. Yeah. And so you have to be able to find signs of hope. The last chapter in my book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together, this version of it is titled Signs of Hope, Sites of Progress. And I put it at the very end because we are living in a moment where there's lots of evidence, as was reported, that would leave you discouraged. But at the same time, if you're paying attention, you can also find sites of change and places where progress is being made and models that can be replicated elsewhere. And I think we have to constantly look for that sign of progress to maintain that sense of hopefulness. And hopefulness is necessary.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it is. I think it's a key part of keeping that Black identity going and keeping it alive. And Marcus, I'd ask you, under the title of that final chapter in your book, you have a powerful enunciation that reads, "Your responsibilities don't start where my survival ends." I found that incredibly interesting, and I lingered on it for a bit. Could you briefly, in relation to the Black identity, could you briefly elaborate on that statement and what it means to you, and also touching on that Black-centered approach as opposed to the anti-racist approach?
Absolutely. All the best lines in the book come from my wife. So that is actually again in the argument with Hannah, and she says it. You know, white people's responsibility does not start where my life ends. you know, and it's making sure that you can take it quite literally with regards to we should not start thinking about racism purely in terms of whether we live or die, you know, that we need to be looking at all forms of racial inequality. So you can look at it like that. But I would say that you need to think of it in terms of broadening it out. Dawn Butler, who's got a chapter in the book, puts it maybe not quite as succinctly as my wife, but she says if George Floyd had been listened to when he was begging for his life, he might have lived. But I don't want to live in a society where I have to beg for my life, right? And I think that is really profound. I want to live in a society of equality. I want to live in a society where we have agency and power over our lives, and we do not judge a society, and we should not judge good policing, for example, as to whether George Floyd's begging is listened to. You know, we do not judge it as to whether, we appease some of the worst excesses of racism. You know, we need to have power and agency over our lives.
Yep, absolutely. And with your experiences in media for well over 2 decades, and assessing the issues in media and diversity with the headlines, with the reporting, with the initiatives that major companies like BBC and ITV carry out to try champion this view of diversity and inclusion. How effective have you seen these attempts to sort of recognize the black experience?
Okay, so a fundamental shift in my thinking was in moving to Scotland in 2007. Yes. The BBC was trying to address at that point issues of regional diversity. The BBC and other media organisations are far too London-centric. That was recognised and was not representing the whole of the UK. And so they moved bases to Scotland, and they moved bases to Salford near Manchester, as well as Cardiff and what have you. Yeah. And more recently, Channel 4 has done the same with regards to Leeds and other places. Right? In doing that, they changed their entire structure. They invested literally millions of pounds in new buildings. They built a new bridge over the River Clyde, right? So structural change. They extended the tram line. They had to petition the Manchester local government. They extended the tram line so it would go into Salford. So looking at, when we talk about structural change, they actually looked at physical structural change. They then looked at structural change with regards to their commissioning roles and how to actually change who was a commissioner, where were the commissioners based, how the commissioners, the television commissioners, reacted and interacted with those communities, and how the actual process of commissioning changed. They had to do all that because they realized, and they then also brought in different metrics for measuring, so structurally changed their metrics for measuring their effectiveness and how their money was spent. All right? After they'd done all that, regional diversity improved. But they had to do physical structural change. They had to do organizational structural change. In all the work which I see the BBC, ITV, all the other broadcasters doing, when it comes to racial diversity, I don't see any of that happening. Right? And I would say that Black British life and Black British diversity is as every part as important as regional diversity. And if they recognize that as the only way to improve regional diversity, broadcasters and other organizations, not just broadcasters, need to recognize they need to implement structural change, not 1 or 2 bits of unconscious bias training.
Absolutely, absolutely. I absolutely agree. I think it's about, and this is, I've always talked about this when I've done my lectures and when I've expressed my thoughts out loud. It's all about the practical, the actual, the structural change that can stem from theoretical conversations. And so, Dr. Tatum, if I may ask you, do you see that structural change occurring anywhere in Black communities, perhaps in the States? Do you see it as a result of any programs, or in actual opposite to the positive structural changes Marx is talking about? Do you actually see processes of residential segregation or gentrification actually actively damaging Black communities? Which one do you think we are veering towards a direction of?
I think there are examples of both happening right now. From, if I think about the United States as a particular, right, you know, as an example, I live in Atlanta, right? I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and Atlanta is known in many places as sort of the mecca for Black life, at least in the United States, because there's opportunity. It's the headquarters of historically Black colleges and universities, places like Spelman College, Morehouse School of Medicine, Clark Atlanta University, all concentrated in, you know, the same neighborhood. Basically, there's a lot of opportunity there. So many people lift it up as an example. But Atlanta is also a city where there's a great deal of income inequality. And in fact, in this context of the United States, it's one of the cities where there is the least opportunity for, if you're a young Black child born into poverty, the odds of getting out of that poverty are quite slim, less than 5%. And that's a worse statistic than some other places. So there's this contradiction, both, you know, opportunity, mecca of opportunity for Black people, such income inequality for somebody actually born in Atlanta. Most of the opportunity that is available in Atlanta seems to be taken up by folks who come to Atlanta from someplace else. I'll put myself in that category, right? Having moved to Atlanta from Massachusetts almost 20 years ago. But having said that, at the same time, there are efforts to preserve communities that I'm going to use as an example. There's a neighborhood, famous neighborhood in Atlanta known as the West Side. It was the home of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he was an adult, raised his family there just prior to his assassination. That's where he was living. Okay. That community was created as a result of segregation. But in today, 2021, that community is being threatened by gentrification because it's located close to downtown. Microsoft is moving its headquarters nearby. There's a lot of things happening that could transform that community. The positive example is that there is an initiative that I've been quite personally involved in called the West Side Future Fund, which is focused on preserving the community for those who actually live there now, not being, as I like to say, development without displacement. You know, how can we invest in the community, make it better and create pathways of mobility for the current residents without displacement? And there are a lot of corporate leaders, white corporate leaders, who are saying, we want to participate in this. We want to help build these structures, these pathways. That's a plus. But at the same time, the forces that press against are still there, right? So right now, I think we are at a choice point collectively. As a society, we're at a point where Dr. King in his last book said we are choosing between chaos or community. I think right at this moment, that's the choice that's being presented in many places. Choosing chaos to keep doing what we've been doing, that's leading to chaos. Or can we shift structurally, collectively, in terms of our consciousness, in a way that creates a greater sense of community? Heather McGhee wrote a wonderful book called The Sum of Us, which is about the cost of racism to everyone, not just the people who are the targets of it. And in it, she says what we need to be working toward is what she calls the solidarity dividend, that there are dividends that come to working in solidarity across racial lines, across class lines, that we have been taught to think in a zero-sum game. And I think that zero-sum thinking is dominating. There's a sense, certainly in the US, perhaps here too, that if Black people's situation improves, it will be at the cost of somebody else, right? You know, if things get better for Black people, white people must be suffering. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. In fact, if we understand what you were talking about, Marcus, in terms of the contribution that Black people we have to make, there's a dividend in that for all of us, right? Not just for those making the contribution, but for those who are able to benefit from that contribution. So when we think about making those changes, is it possible? Are there places where people are trying to work collectively for the common good? I would say yes. Is that the majority of what's happening right now? In fact, in the U.S. right now, there's so much pushback against that. The attack on so-called critical race theory, the notion that we should just stop talking about this and go back to business as usual.
Yeah,
right,
of course.
is the impulse that is being given greatest voice right now. But I do think we're at this choice point where it is possible to move ahead if we line up in solidarity.
Yes.
And I would add that similarly in the UK, there are dog whistles around that zero-sum game. And so you hear it a lot when you talk about white working class boys, as if somehow there is a choice between black achievement and the educational achievement of white working class boys, as if the success of one is going to be predicated on the failure of another, or that resources need to be put towards, aren't going to white working class boys, because somehow they are magically going and disproportionately going to black people. So you see that. So the idea of that zero-sum game is not accidental, I don't think, but I think it is propagated by certain people that who are in positions of power who like to sometimes see it like that. It's not a coincidence.
Yep, no, certainly. And with that change, just as we come to our closing remarks in our limited time, question to the both of you, because I believe, as a young black man trying to learn and educate myself and grow up in this society, rapidly changing, innovating society, I suppose. I think education, and you touch on this very strongly in your book, education plays a massive part, and it's deeply problematic. The black communities and the amount of black children don't get the opportunities. But Marcus, I suppose I'll start with you. As recently taking obviously the role of chair at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, RADA, what do you want young adults and young black men and women to notice about the headlines? What advice would you give to them to be able to learn, speak out, but also not be suppressed and caught out by the systemic traps, the structural racism that you refer to so often?
So I think obviously education is incredibly important, as I'm sure Beverly would attest to. And we have a chapter in the book by Kahindi Andrews, who talks about the importance of education, and you're seeing in the UK, you're seeing a rediscovery of Saturday schools and supplementary schools, which I taught in coming out of university in the early 90s, and it's great to see that you can have a reflowering, or I don't know, the reflowering of that, the rediscovery of those. So I think that's really important. I think the way that, to name drop, just very briefly, I was in a discussion with David Harewood, and David Harewood was talking about the fact that in many ways his black identity, until right up to the point where he had his psychotic breakdown when he was in his early 20s, was because he saw his blackness purely in reaction to racism. He didn't see anything positive per se about his blackness. His blackness was framed in terms of what he was denied. And so what he was actually striving for was a non-racialized world. Not a world that where you would love and cherish your blackness. He just wanted a non-racialized world. That then came crashing down when he graduated from RADA, and he realized he took on a part Romeo and Juliet, and he had got terrible critics panned it, and mentioned his race constantly in all the reviews. And he realized that he couldn't be in a non-racialized world. You know, up until that point, he was in a bit of a bubble. RADA and universities can be bubbles, so he's in a bit of a bubble, and that's when he had his psychotic breakdown.
Yeah.
And so, to answer your question, I think the best armor for all of us, psychologically, is to make sure that we find something positive and grounded in our identities. And our identities cannot be a reaction, but they need to be proactive. You know, so I think we've got Shaka Hislop coming later. Is that correct? You know, and you know, having gone to and enjoyed Trinidad Carnival myself, you know, I can take tremendous joy in my Caribbean identity. I can take tremendous joy, you know, in my specific Jamaican identity, and in the diasporic identity. And it's in that joy that that really shields me, not just being a reaction to racism.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's absolutely fantastic. I think it's about that culture and experience, and also as a university student, very quickly, just before I come on to you, Beverly, for your final remarks, as a university student, certainly something that this university bubble in education has not taught me is about my self-development and my Black identity. And it's been a process of exploration, which I would encourage audience, live, online, and here, to seek out that exploration, to learn from, you know, your those before you, but also your peers around you and what they're going through. Really try to extract all the fruits from any of your labor, really. And finally, Beverly, just tagging along after Marcus there, your thoughts on education, the advice that you'd give to young Black men and women about, you know, going forward with their experiences, careers, in their body, mind, and soul. How do you think, wrapping up, how do you think education plays a part of that? And in terms of, as Marcus talks about, the Black identity.
Education has a very important role, but it has to be the right kind of education, right? We know that education can be soul-killing if it is makes you feel invisible, if it doesn't affirm who you are. But when you have the opportunity to immerse yourself in experiences that open doors, that give you a sense of possibility, then it can be quite liberating. The quintessential nature of that kind of education can be found at a place like Spelman College, historically Black college for women, Morehouse College, historically Black college for men. I know that there are not comparable institutions here in the UK, but I want to lift my experience having served as president of Spelman for 13 years as an example. I used to say to the young women who were interested in coming that this is a place where you can say, this place was built for you, where you're going to be at the center of the educational experience. Everything that you want to do is available to you. It's not available to you if nobody else wants it, right? It's available to you because you are at the center. It's the quintessential Black-centered experience. And what you see as a result of that are young women who graduate with an incredible amount of self-confidence, who go on to be truly change makers in the world. And I think it just speaks to the power of an education that is affirming, as opposed to one that is not.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's our panel. Thank you very much, Marcus Ryder, MBE, and Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. I suppose finally I'll say, really just focus on that, as Marcus and Beverly were so rightly talking about, focus on that real structural change, that practical change, and learn from your experiences and the experiences of those around you. Research and understand the statistics, the facts, why the things are the way they are today for us as Black people and Black identity. And through the right type of education, as you say, you can then begin to uncover the truth. And the truth can, as the saying goes, the truth will set you free. So thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Marcus and Beverly. Thank you.
Well, despite the harsh reality of the facts that were stated in that debate, I've got to say it's filled me with optimism, and I hope it has you too. A huge thank you again to diversity and media expert Marcus Ryder, MBE, author and academic Beverly Daniel Tatum, and the brilliant student Amar Otashi. So we move on from our opinions on the Black Lives Matter movement and the British experience and a wider notion of equality here and in the States. We centre now on the role of celebrities in activism. To lead the discussion will be Trevor Blackman. Trevor is a youth consultant for the British Council and the Greater London Authority, and the founder of a youth and community charity called Ape Media. He'll be joined by football commentator and analyst and social entrepreneur Shaka Hislop and the award-winning singer Josh Daniel. Enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Beverly. Good afternoon to everyone. How are you all doing today? How are we? Yes, we are going to break through that invisible bubble that you have right now because you want to hear your thoughts and feelings as well. So one of the things you'll do is you might do something like this. Oh my God, really? Is it imaginable that someone could? We just did. I really want to see you get involved in this discussion because what we move into now, as Brenda says, is a discussion around celebrity and that word that encompasses engagement, action, power, movement. It's called activism. And when we put those together, celebrity and activism, some people say no, don't hold that space. But if we look at 2020, we now say Marcus Radford MBE, because he was challenged with it himself from his lived experience to support 4 million children and their families in relation to food insecurity, food poverty. If we flip back to 2016 and we say Colin Kirkpatrick taking the knee at NFL, supporting Black Lives Matter, knowing that 6 billion plus people potentially could be watching online and on their TV sets. Remember, there's about 9 odd billion people in this world. He took the knee and then experienced the fire and fury online, and also by the then sitting president. But he felt it was important to use that moment, use that time to express something that was dear to him. Black Lives Matter. So there is the argument that the space shouldn't be occupied by celebrities, but then we think to advance things, we need them. We're going to have a conversation, and maybe you'll join us in that conversation as well. I've got 2 distinguished panelists joining me today. You've heard. If you were with us last night at World Headquarters, you'll know that the first panelist is an award-winning singer and songwriter, over 1 billion views on YouTube, 50 million streams. You might remember him from the X Factor in 2015 as well. Josh Daniel is here. Give him a round of applause. And a living legend. I studied in Newcastle, okay, at the time when he was here. Well, just slightly after he was here, in the 90s, okay? So Andy Cole. This is a footballing legend, a social entrepreneur, a football commentator, also analyst. He's the honorary president of Show Racism the Red Card, and he's wearing socks still today that support his old team. Please give it up for the one and only Shaka Hislop. Good to see you. Good to see you. So look, we're going to get into a conversation now, and like I said, I am watching because I am going to come to you because it's important. I'm going to start though with you first, Shaka. In the 90s, something happened where in 1996, you decided not only to put your own money into something, but to start something absolutely fantastic, which still resonates to us today. But there was an incident that took place in 1990. Just share with us, before I ask you my first question, what happened?
So I guess the spark to the founding of Show Racism the Red Card was on the back of a racist incident that I suffered just after joining Newcastle United myself. My wife and I were out in town. We needed petrol late one night. There was a petrol station just outside St. James's Park. I'm not sure if it's still there. and we pulled over. And as I'm filling up with petrol, a group of youths come walking down the hill outside St. James's Park and started shouting racist abuse at me. As they got closer, one of those kids recognized who I was. They started chanting my name and asking for autographs. As I put it, from 50 yards away, I was a black man worthy of the most vile racist abuse. From 50 feet away, I was to be lauded and my autograph asked for. It sparked a conversation between myself and Jed Greby, the founder of Show Racism the Red Card and CEO. He was doing some work with a group called Youth Against Racism in Europe at the time in the Northeast. He had written to players in Newcastle, as he did. I always answered my own fan mail, and I responded to Jed's letter about Youth Against Racism in Europe with a small check and a promise to support his work however I can. So the conversation between him and I then shifted to that racist incident, to how it spoke to the duality of who I was as a black man here in the Northeast, and how we can use that experience, how we can use my platform as a footballer to advance the work around anti-racism and the call for equality. And proudly I say, Show Racism the Red Card, celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, we have grown to become the largest anti-racist educational charity in the United Kingdom. Some 850,000 children have been through our day-long workshops, which is always kind of surreal for me to speak about. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, a country, a population of 1.3 million people, and now here I am talking about 850,000 children and counting, being impacted by an organization that I was there at the founding of.
Absolutely. Marcus rightly talked in his keynote about Doreen Lawrence and the argument Marcus was having with his wife at the time on about the book and a certain direction it should take and why people do certain things. Within your charity, you very much honed in on education.
Yes.
And educating young people in order, I suspect, to change the narrative later on down the line. But yet, if we fast forward still to today, and we look at West Ham 4 months ago, chanting, people throwing things to the black players, it's still there. So how do we root it out when our young people and our seniors are still partaking in those racist abuse and language to players? How far have we come in the last 18 plus years?
I'll describe it as my glass is always half full, and I always tend to focus on the progress as opposed to how much further we still have to go. I thought what Marcus just said moments ago about the first slave on the first slave ship, wondering how do we get these shackles off, and it took some 400 years to get the physical shackles off, and we're still having discussions today around how we share the impacts of our peoples being enslaved for centuries. This is a long journey, and I accepted that I may not live in the shade of equality, but I have a responsibility to nurture that tree. I have a responsibility to water it for the next generation, in the hope that next generation, I'm also the father of 5 children, in the hope that they can experience that warm embrace. And if they don't, they continue this work. They continue to water that tree in the hope that before long we get to understand what true equality really means and how it's better for all of us.
And make that change. I think it's about thinking into those results. I think it's about making sure that everyone's in line, moving in the right direction, and continuing to challenge as well. I want to pause for a moment and just see if anyone has a question for Shaka at all, or a comment. We can break through that bubble if you wish to. Okay. Don't ever say I never asked you, because I am coming back to ask you in a moment, all right? I want to turn to you, Josh. I'm going to come back to you in a moment. Shaka, I started by saying, it's a choice whether you use that celebrity power in some ways to advance an idea, an issue, a cause. You started 2015. I remember watching you on X Factor. I remember that Labyrinth song, and we heard it yesterday in terms of jealousy. And you talked about your friend who died. We are now in 2021. Over 1 billion people have seen you perform on YouTube, 50 million streams. You know, you're getting there. Do you have, in any sense, a part of you that feels, I need to use my celebrity to advance, whether that's around young people, whether that's around young people in suicide, whether it's around black... Do you feel a need to do any of that, or is it not something you're thinking of right now?
I do feel like we, or anybody who has any kind of platform that they're able to use, I do feel like we do have a responsibility to use it. I think the bigger responsibility is actually to use it for something that is honest, that is genuine, that matters to you, because celebrities are in a bit of a strange time where in the world of brand deals and in the world of endorsements, celebrities often push messages that they might not actually believe in themselves. So I feel like the responsibility, the bigger responsibility, looking at the bigger picture, is actually that when you do use that platform, you use it for something that's important, you use it to push a message that needs to be heard.
Authentic.
And it's authentic, yeah, and I 100% believe that that is, you know, the bigger responsibility that people with platforms have.
Have you been approached to get behind certain things and you've said no?
Yeah, and one of the things that myself and my manager have always maintained is that I will never personally endorse or work with a brand or a charity or something that I don't believe in, and it's, you know, and it's not something that we would ever look to do. We're not about, you know, we've turned down large sums of money for some of these types of deals and performing at some of these types of events. But for me, like I say, the overall responsibility is making sure that, you know, I uphold, you know, my authenticity, and that the people, younger people, young black people who are looking at me and what I'm doing with my platform, appreciate that what I'm doing is real. And so that's the most important thing for me.
Shaka, have you ever been approached to get behind something and you said, no, this isn't right?
No.
Okay.
No. I think it's a different time now, kind of given where we are with the social media space and how people are using celebrities to echo a message. I'm not at all active on social media, so I guess I'm just not that attractive to brands. But I've always been focused on the things that matter to me, and I've been involved in the things that matter to me. I haven't needed anyone to reach out to me in that respect. So I'm not at all bothered or discouraged by the fact that such brands have not extended that invitation.
In the intro, I talked about Colin Kirkpatrick and the backlash he experienced when he took the knee. 1996, you decide, I want to start a charity that really addresses racism in football. People around you at the time, not all of them were supporting, I guess. Tell me how you, or were they?
They were, and now I have to say my experience is very different. As I mentioned, I was born here in the United Kingdom, but my dad was at law school. We left when I was only 2 years old, so I have no recollection of it. I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago. I regard myself as Trinidadian and Tobagonian. I then went off to university in the United States at Howard University and HBCU, as Beverly was just mentioning. So my entire childhood into adulthood, I was part of an ethnic majority. I was surrounded by blackness. I was surrounded by black excellence. That's what I knew. And it's only coming to England at age 23 after graduating university that I am immersed in this culture where I am seen as a minority and I experience the hardships that we still experience today in modern day Britain. I will also add that Newcastle supported everything that we did.
Okay.
The dressing room supported everything that we did. I often talk about our first school visit. As a charity, we started by myself and a teammate going to schools and just talking to kids about our own experiences. The first school visit was with John Beresford, from Sheffield, a Sheffield United fan, grew up as a Sheffield United fan, and he spoke about going onto the terraces of Bramall Lane and shouting racist abuse at black players, not recognizing exactly how damaging what he was doing was. And it was only as he progressed as a player in the junior England national teams, rooming with Darren Beckford, a black player who became his best friend, and using a racial slur with Darren Beckford, and Darren sitting down and explaining to him the damage that he was doing and why it was so hurtful and why he recoiled and reacted that way. That John started to understand more of the black experience. And I thought, especially as a first message, it was powerful for us. It was powerful to deliver to those kids. And it provided a foundation for the honesty, the authenticity that Jacob spoke about in who we were and in our storytelling, because that has to pin everything that we do.
I'm looking at, I suppose I struggle when I look at 2020 and May 25th, George Floyd, and then just this energy beyond which I've ever seen before in terms of the Football Association now saying, okay, let's truly throw that red card, let's stop racism. And I don't know how you sat with that. It's great, it's good, absolutely, but it took the death of a man in America and a tidal wave of outcry across the world for them to do, which you started in 1996, and that's the chairperson of West Ham, that's the chairperson in terms of Newcastle United, everyone getting beyond and getting behind. But because of that May 25th, what were you thinking before you even got phone calls, before you saw the big figures that were going to come for the marketing campaigns and all of that, when you got the phone call to say, right, we're stepping it up, when the phone went down, what did you think?
Let me just say, first off, Trevor, I really struggled in the wake of the death of George Floyd. I found it hard, and though I've been involved in this work, as I say, for 25 years, I feel like we started Show Racism the Red Card as a promise to my own children to deliver a better world to them. And now here I was confronted with a feeling that I felt like I failed in the most basic of promises to my own children. And it really impacted me in a way that I struggled with for long periods. And not just about George Floyd. When you recognize the black experiences and how thin that line it is between it being someone I love and the names that were in the headlines, I could see any one of my daughters being in the same position as Breonna Taylor. Tamir Rice was 12 years old when he was shot outside a playground. May 2020, my son was 12 years old. My wife and I, we travel with our kids for their activities. We go for runs when in an effort to keep fit. I could so easily see Ahmaud Arbery's story being any one of ours. And in recognizing that, I really struggled with the moment. I spoke to another of our senior vice presidents, Leroy Rossignol, former footballer himself, and he said, Shaka, you have to see this as a relay. We're handing the baton off. We have to empower the next generation with our own experiences, with the knowledge, and trust in them to run the next leg. We may not finish this race, but we have to, and I found real motivation in that. And because of everything that the pandemic and for all its hardships, the one positive I could take about it is the way the world became virtual. So now I'm sitting in my house just outside Boston, and I can be involved in so much more of the work that we were doing as a campaign. And that is where I found my focus. That's where I found a renewed energy around around this call for equality. A call that started, and you mentioned Colin Kaepernick and his taking a knee and the kind of symbolism of it. And then the police officer kneeling on George Floyd's neck, and the similarity, the parallels. And I felt everything about those experiences, as hurtful, as damaging, as difficult as they were, it highlighted the calls of the black community that had gone unheard for generations.
I felt your frustration, but I saw your hope in what you said.
I find, as I mentioned, my glass is always half full, you know, and I often always say, I cannot tell my story without telling my father's story. My father's part of the Windrush generation, came over here in the 60s. In 1963, I believe it was, him and a friend of his, Desmond Allen, walking home late one night. 2 police officers pulled them over, break a car glass, and arrest them both for attempted auto theft. Desmond was in law school. They sued the Metropolitan Police. They won what was a record settlement at the time, £8,000. My dad took his share, £4,000, enrolled in law school, hadn't returned to Trinidad for some time, went back to Trinidad for a 6-week holiday just to see his mom, and in that 6-week holiday, met and proposed to my mother. So from the most frightening of experiences, most traumatic of experiences, my father met and proposed to my mother. My father enrolled in law school. And it gave an example. Here we are talking about 2 young black men from the Caribbean taking on and beating the Metropolitan Police in mid-60s Britain. And that is the example that I lived with. That is the example that I always lean on. If they could do that in mid-60s Britain, there's so much I can do in delivering on their example here in 2020.
You are. Josh, I want to turn to you, and we're going to get through this bubble. I'm coming to you. I'm not even going to look at you. I'm not going to look, but I'm coming. I want to turn to you, Josh, because I talked about the need, not even the need, but the sense that people of celebrity should put themselves in positions to support whatever. But actually, as a celebrity, and you're new-ish, really, there's other things that are going on for you which mean you can't put yourself in spaces. You've got to sort yourself out. You've got to make sure that you can get up in the morning and put food on the table for yourself in order to do what you do. What have you been focusing on, and what have you found hard, just being a celebrity and expectations of what it means to be a celebrity?
I think it is a tricky balance, because you do kind of start to lose a bit of yourself sometimes. And I'm very fortunate in my position, but at the same time, my going from not having any kind of profile at all to the profile that I have was a very fast acceleration. It happened very, very quickly. And I had never been exposed to any of the elements of celebrity that suddenly all landed on my doorstep overnight. And I just always wanted to be a singer. I always wanted to perform. I always wanted to write songs, and I always wanted to connect with people. I've learned that I didn't really want any of the other things that came with celebrity. And I mean, I have friends now who, just recently, a couple of weeks ago, I was writing a song with a friend, and he glamorized my profile and was like, I really want to be famous. I can't wait until everybody knows my name. As a young kid, he's only 20 years old. He's just coming onto the scene, and he can't wait to get out there into this world of, celebrity. And I didn't want to say to him, there is some realities that you should probably be aware of, because I thought, I don't want to burst a 20-year-old's bubble. He's obviously very excited to get out there. But that's what the truth of it is that, when I first got my profile, it was very, very intense. I couldn't walk down the street without people wanting to take pictures. I'm quite a private person. And so I did feel that was quite intrusive. It was lovely. All I'd ever wanted was for people to listen to my music and for people to care about my artistry. But it does blur the line a little bit between people caring and showing an interest and actually being a little bit intrusive.
But do you see, and this is not about the spoken, this is just about the physical, but do you see the importance of you as a mixed race person being seen by other mixed black and brown young people doing your thing, holding your space with confidence? Do you see the importance of that? Because that in itself makes a statement. You don't all have to sit here and start talking about things. Just your presence has power. Do you get that?
Yeah, 100%. And I do feel that, you know, it really is important that people see us showing up. And people, like you say, people see us showing up with confidence and showing up being unapologetically ourselves and not hiding, and not cowering. And so, you know, there has been times when I've not been in the best place mentally and not felt up to, you know, meeting a certain type of obligation that might be asking too much of me personally. But I show up when I need to, because I'm very careful about the fact that, you know, that's the image that we need to give. And I am a confident, you know, I'm a young black man and I am confident and I do feel that way. And so it's not as though I'm trying to disguise what I really feel. It's just that, you know, we have, everyone has a lot going on. But I just think it's important that that is what we show.
You're showing up, both of you are showing up right now. Okay, I am coming to you, okay? And I'm not taking no for an answer. So what I'm going to do, I think there's a mic over here, actually. Oh, we've got two people. Okay, so the lady there, go, let's have a question or a comment. I really don't mind, they don't mind. And let's find out what you've got to say.
Thank you. Charlie Magadar-Williams from Costa Coffee. My question's for you, Shaka. You spoke about handing over the baton to the next generation, which I really like. What would you like them to do with it?
Good question.
That's a very good question. I would just like them to recognize the example that's gone before them and deliver on that example in a way that only they can define. I can't define what the next generation is to do with that baton. But I am very sensitive of example. And as Josh was speaking there, I couldn't help but smile. Oftentimes when people talk to me about Show Racism the Red Card, they speak about the legacy of the organization. And legacy is not something I've ever been focused on. I feel example is far more powerful, a focus, for me at least. And let me just acknowledge that some of the staff from Show Racism the Red Card are here today. I see their work and they are so much more than I ever thought I ever saw myself to be. And I feel that's them delivering on an example, on maybe my example. And as Josh was speaking, I have to make this point, Josh, because I was, a few weeks ago, I was on one of Zoom calls, as we've all done over the last couple of years, and Alex Williams was on. The name may not ring familiar to many. Alex Williams was a goalkeeper for Manchester City, black goalkeeper for Manchester City through the 80s. Only black goalkeeper in top-level football that I was aware of. And I was starstruck. And I speak about example because there is absolutely no way that Alex Williams, pulling on a shirt for Manchester City, being racially abused for doing something that he loved, there is no way that he knew he was impacting a young boy's life half a world away in Trinidad and Tobago. There's absolutely no way. And I now see what I've done, what I've been a part of, as delivering on his example. Alex didn't define what that was for me, nor do I hope or expect to define what that is for the next generation. I can only hope to provide that example and trust them to deliver on it.
Brilliant. Let's get another question. Give a round of applause for that. Let's get another question. Let's get a mic to the front. Oh, no, we've got some. Say your name and...
Yeah, sure. Menashe Jera from Costa Coffee as well.
Okay.
It's a question really for Shaka. well, I'll start with the statement. I used to actually play in youth academy football, and the show, The Red Card, basically had a talk in my area, and it impacted us in a way that when I actually went on my first tour, I actually experienced racism whilst in Scotland, and my teammates actually backed me up because they had actually had the training and the talks from one of the people from you. So for that, I do thank you, and your work has not gone unseen. But secondly, I'm a big sports fan, obviously. So Colin Kaepernick took the knee in 2016. The NBA had various things that they'd done last year to kind of show solidarity in jerseys and all this stuff whilst they're in the bubble. Football's been recently taken the knee, and I would say that the impact of all three has obviously been met with backlash as well as support. But do you think that it's enough for football to just be content with the knee, or there should be more action that should be openly displayed?
The truth is, I find football, and certainly footballers, doing a lot more now. And I'm very encouraged by that. And I think the taking of the knee is important in its symbolism. It shows community. It shows who we are. It announces to the rest of the world what we stand for. But of course, I understand the criticism that taking a knee is not going to change anything. And that is absolutely right. But I see it as community sharing a voice or making a statement, albeit briefly. But it has to be seen as a commitment to make a difference when you stand up. It is not about taking the knee. It is about your promise of effective change or effective action, meaningful action, when you stand back up. That has to be what the focus is when you do. Because if you aren't committed to that action, then don't bother taking the knee.
And I just want to add to this then, because Marcus talked earlier on about structural racism, and it's important, I feel maybe, to upset people, to make people feel uncomfortable, to really shake that building so the cracks start to appear, so actually then we can rebuild it the way we should rebuild it. So taking the knee isn't just a symbolism, it's also a push for that change. And as comfortable as people may be watching it, seeing it, it has to take place, or else we just go back into vacuums of conversations. And then here's my point. So how do we make that transformational change unless we make people feel uncomfortable?
I think transformational change comes in a variety of ways, and in a variety of spaces. They used to say that Dr. Martin Luther King wouldn't be as effective as he was, but for Malcolm X. And similarly, I feel as we look at today's world, its challenges, how we push for change. Now, it's easy for me to say I use my platform as a footballer because football is the most popular sport in this country, and I understand its reach not just here in England, but globally. But we have to have artists making that same call. For people who identify as artists themselves. We have to have young female dancers. My eldest daughter dances. We have to embrace this change in every walk of our lives. It's not just reserved for footballers or for singers. We have to continue to push for that change, and not just through each of our activities, but through each of our voices. Whether I speak as through my voice and through the work of Show Race and the Red Card, or something more impactful, something louder, something that shakes the foundations of the building. Those go hand in hand. I do not see them as being opposed to each other. I don't see them as pushing back. They add to it. I feel that a lot of this work, when we talk about progress and when we measure progress, we do it side by side, almost in a comparison. When I feel that the measuring of progress needs to be end to end. How far do we go when we the work that I do, the work that you do, when we put them end to end, we measure how far we've come. And I feel at times we've gotten that aspect of it wrong as well.
I hear you. So it's everything from scientists and beyond. We all need to occupy spaces, CEOs and beyond, in order to bring that change. Okay, we've got more questions. There we go. What's your name and what's your question or comment?
Hi, I'm Richard from Education Worker for Show Race and the Red Card. First off, I just want to say it's a great honour to meet Shaka. His story about representation as being a young man over in Trinidad and Tobago, being inspired by a goalkeeper playing in Manchester, exactly the same for me. I'm born and raised in Newcastle, and I had posters of him on the wall, Andy Cole, Les Ferdinand, so yeah, he definitely inspired me, because I'm an ex-football player as well, so he inspired me on my journey, and also now that I work with Show Race and the Red Card, I'm following these footsteps, yeah.
You've gone full circle.
Exactly, yeah. So, thank you. But first off, my question is mostly to Josh, but to anybody who wants to answer. What are the dangers of maybe performative activism, or are the dangers of that, or could it be even seen as a positive? So say if a brand is doing something that might be deemed performative on the outside, is the message of just to be seen doing something, is that better than nothing, or is it dangerous?
Josh?
It's a tricky one. And in my opinion, I do feel like I don't necessarily believe that doing something is better than nothing if it's not doing the right thing. And I stand by that, and I would rather be quiet than deliver something that could potentially harm a cause. So for me, I definitely think it has to be right. But at the same time, I feel like we do have a responsibility to, if a brand approaches us and wants us to do a certain type of work, or wants us to perform, or wants us to deliver a message to our audience and use our platform, and it's not quite right, then I feel like, again, we also have the responsibility to push back to the brand and say, well, how about we adapt the message to be this? This is the reason why, and I feel like it would be, a safer message to deliver, or a more accurate message. And so again, I do feel like a lot of the responsibility falls to the artist or the influencer or the celebrity and their teams to make sure that not only are we saying, no, we don't believe that's the right message, we should go back and try and educate the people who clearly need educating. So that's where I stand on that.
Shaka?
Yeah, I totally agree. Listen, I think it's far more damaging to add your name, albeit even if it's a short-term financial fix, to something that you do not truly believe in. Josh mentioned it earlier, and it's a word that I think I certainly have to hang on: authenticity, and just being true to who you are and what you believe in. And in today's world, people see straight through anything that's not honest, that's inauthentic. It's easy to just kind of recognize the BS for what it is. And as a result, I think we've done this much. My most valued possession is my name. And anything that goes against that, I think is not worth the effort or the reward, whatever that reward may look like.
Amen to that. I'm going to take a few more questions. Anyone else? Oh, just get you a mic. Wait, and we'll just get you a mic so you can be heard. At the front. Just at the front down here.
These two guys have a race.
It's like Challenge Annika, isn't it? There we go. Stop the clock. What's your name and comment or question?
My name is Natural Langdon. I'm a PhD student here at Newcastle. There's so many questions and things I want to say and ask, and it's just overwhelming. But I will just start with the mental health of it all, right? Because you're all in a situation where you're gifted at something. And when you're gifted at something, people attract to that gift, right? They're attracted to the gift, but not the person behind the gift. How do you deal with that? How do you wake up every day? You mentioned that some days you don't want to be bothered. Some days you just want to relax. You have to perform on a stage. You perform every day. How do you show up when you don't want to show up? And how do you deal with yourself on a mental health level, you know, as a black man, we come with so many stresses in our life, and like so much, like we all have to perform on a high level, right? How do you show up? And we're gifted in so many different ways. What do you say to the people that don't know their gifts, right? How do you express to keep going to someone that don't have hope, you know? Because there's people and things pushing you forward every day based on your gifts and your talents. How do you just tell an average person to like get out the bed and show up, you know? Okay. It's a struggle for that, you know?
I will comment on that in a minute, but
I'll pass it to
Josh first, because it came from you, Josh. Yeah. You said about, you know, you've got to show up, but I mean, because in many ways you've been gifted that opportunity, but it's got to be hard. It's got to be hard to show up every time when you think, actually, I just want to stay in the duvet.
Yeah, it is hard sometimes, and I think you've made a very valid point there in saying that, you know, we're almost incentivized to show up because we have a profile, we have a platform, or we have obligations to meet. And, you know, how do we get, you know, somebody who works a 9-to-5 job, somebody who's a student, somebody who lives life like a normal person, how do we get that person to not stay under the duvet, so you put it? And again, I think that it's just really important that we continue to show up, and not just, you know, me doing something like this today, I am not singing, I'm not performing, I'm not showing people that I can write songs, I'm not demonstrating anything to do with my gift. I'm just showing up to be part of the discussion. And, you know, I have a, you know, fairly large audience of people my age and younger, and I think that it's important that we're represented from all verticals. You know, like you said, Shaka, it's important that it's not just footballers, it's not just artists, it's people from all walks of life, it's people from all verticals. And I think the more that we broadly represent, we slowly start to include more people.
I get you on that, but I'm going to expand slightly what I think the questionnaire is saying, because it's also about who's supporting you. Yeah, in order to show up, you need to have people holding you. You need to have people who care for you, who you trust as well, to give you that talk sometimes, to get up, to do the thing, to do the event. So you've got to make sure you're surrounded by the right people as well.
Do you know what? It's interesting, just on that, because I had quite a different upbringing to you, Shaka, and so my dad is black, my mum is white, and my dad hasn't been around for my whole life. So my upbringing was almost the opposite to yours. I essentially had all white family. Mum was a single parent, and all white friends. I grew up in the northeast of England, where I was one of, if not the only at times, I was one of probably 2 black people in the whole school. I didn't grow up around black friends. I didn't grow up around any black family. And so for me, it was almost quite isolating, because as much as I had the love and support of my family and friends, it's not something that my family and friends could empathize with, you know. And so although they could give me all of the love and support in the world, there will always be that slight disconnect. And so I think it's just an interesting point you've made there about a support network, because for me, you know, it's not as though I had my black father there who understands the struggles that a young black man would go through, who could sit me down and have that talk with me, you know, and provide some of that support network. So you almost have to start to pave a little bit of that support network for yourself, and sort of build a bit of a thicker skin and build a little bit of armor to kind of, you know, cover yourself against that kind of thing.
We're running out of time, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this conversation offline, because we've got a 10 minutes break, because I think it's important that you two have that and you hear that your question answered, and I will share with you as well. But for now, I've got to say thank you, Shaka Hislop, and also Josh Daniel. Please give them a round of applause. I've got to thank you as well, our studio audience. Thank you very much as well, your contributions. We're going to take a 10-minute break when we're literally going to go from celebrity activism to really how you look at amplifying in the space that you surround, but you're not in at all because it's social media, beyond the hashtag, how do we continue to make some change? How do we build a legacy? How do we not just talk, but there's some action as well? And the wonderful Amar Al-Tazi will be moderating that, so we will see you all in 10 minutes. Thank you. please take your seats and call anybody who's outside to come and take theirs as well. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to make a start now. So thank you all. Get drinks if you need them, but we're going to start now. I want to welcome you back to Black Britain and Beyond. This is the last symposium day. We've been here for the last 4 days. I want to thank the University of Newcastle for hosting this amazing series of conversations and talks, which are important for our communities. We are going to continue those conversations, though, in a while, where we look at building that legacy beyond the hashtag, and we can all have our comments on that, and that's going to be wonderfully chaired by Amara Otasi. But before that, we've got a little video for you, and it comes from one of the students here at the University of Newcastle. He's a PhD student. His name is Natural Langdon. Hopefully I've said that right, yes. Natural Langdon. And he, over the last 5 years, has been going to Africa in search of his roots in many ways, but also in order to give voice to young people in Africa, teaching them filmmaking skills, should I say, and allowing them to have a worldwide platform to speak of their lived experiences. We're going to share first this film with you. It's about 10 minutes, and then we will talk to Natural. So enjoy.
Natural Langdon here in Ethiopia, working with the youth, teaching them how to use the cameras to tell their own story, from Addis Ababa to the Oma Valley. So today, we're here. The kids were very interested in using the camera. Okay. So we're gonna leave one here. Okay. I'm gonna put you in charge of it, okay? Yeah. And they'll have it. And then they can shoot pictures, and then you guys can send me some stuff on the internet when you get a chance. They were very interested in the cameras. Now they got it. So, one love. Keep this here. Hold this. Now, press this. Yes. Press it. Now, yeah. This one, you press this. There you go. Yes, press this one. You taking a picture? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now look at this. Watch this. This is you. He jumped it? Oh. Wow.
I want to call the director, the producer, the maker of that, Nature Langdon, to say a few words.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to Keith. Thank you to my ancestors. You know, I'm so emotional at this moment because it just reminds me how powerful we are as a people and how our voices have been minimized in so many different ways, you know. And it's been a struggle just being here as a student to get my work shown, so I'm really grateful. I just want to say thank you. That's it. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Nature Langdon there, thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on now to really a space which can amplify voices in many ways, can be disruptive in many ways, and also can be inspiring in many ways. But if we are to build a legacy, we need to build a legacy beyond the hashtags when we look at Black Britain and beyond. So, I'm delighted now to hand over to one of the founders of Warwick University think tank, a student body that puts research to solutions on all global challenges at its heart. Welcome to moderate this section now, Amar Al-Tassi. Amara O'Tassi, I apologise.
Thank you very much, Joe. All right. Okay then, well, thank you everyone for returning live and in person in our studio. So, the legacy beyond hashtags is the theme we're going to explore for this final part of what has been an incredible 4-day symposium. And firstly, I would like to invite some people to join me in this panel. We're going to be discussing this topic further and providing a brilliant insight. Now, first, we have Emzo Ngwenya, who is an accounting student at the University of Reading, who has found his voice being the president of the Afro-Caribbean Society and taking on his own responsibilities and struggles as a black man, as well as those of his peers. So please welcome Emzo. We also have Marcel Hedman, whose education has not only taken him to the University of Cambridge, but also the University of Harvard, researching data, but previously in his undergraduate studies looking at natural sciences and physics. He has incredibly been the founder of Neural Research, which is essentially an initiative which produces thousands of articles regarding AI and data and how they can be used to tackle global challenges from public health to climate change. And that I also mentioned that he's also currently a business analyst at McKinsey & Company. You now know that too, and I hope that he gives a very unique insight and perspective from the side of data into this issue of a legacy beyond hashtags. Please, everyone, Marcel. Now, we also have Elliot Fahemi, who's an investment specialist at 91, an asset management firm and a global investment manager in many locations around the world, including Johannesburg and indeed here in the United Kingdom, in London. He graduated from ESSEC Business School in Paris with a first-class honors in his Bachelor's of Business Administration and in Finance. And he's also a co-founder of the ESSEC Investment Club, which is actually a student-led body which researches and invests into European equities. He also completed an exchange year in Trinity College Dublin, where he took on the role of equity analyst at a student-managed fund. Please, everyone, welcome Mr. Elliot Fahemi. And I believe we may have joining us virtually. There she is, Miss Naomi Okukenu, who is a recent graduate from the University of Cambridge, also excelling in international studies and politics. Importantly, she's also a co-founder of the Wealth Creation Report that Black Britain and Beyond has so kindly produced for us in a concise and detailed, but also incredibly relevant manner. So please, everyone, welcome Naomi Okukenu. Right, so with that, I suppose we can begin. Thank you for joining me, guys. So we have this conversation of a legacy beyond hashtags, and I find this entire discourse of social media very interesting because unlike the flyers and protests and posters that we might see at protests, these hashtags live eternally on the internet, behind millions of screens and algorithms and stored data, and they're not something that the government can just easily suppress, throw away in a bin, physically stop. They're virtual. They're in South Africa, they're in London, they're in the United States, in Canada, in Nigeria, in every country. And so I suppose the first thing I wanted to ask is, and I'll ask it to all three of you and go through the three of you, and also, of course, Naomi. How do you think hashtags and social media in general provide a way for Black communities specifically to connect better than they might be able to in the physical world, where a lot of times there are obstacles and limitations and barriers put in place to stop those connections happening? Emzo, if you want to comment on that.
Well, I feel like in terms of hashtags connecting the Black community and making it more of a sense of unity is the sense, of course, of unity. I believe that with the hashtags, now that's more of a digital world, we can spread our word and what's going around in our day-to-day lives a lot faster, a lot quicker. See, a problem was that at least growing up, and at least when you hear stories about issues that which Black people face when they were younger or whether it be in education, is that something would happen to them, and then who are they going to tell? Do you get what I mean? So having that privilege to be able to tell their story, or having that privilege to be able to say and get out to people, this is what's happening to me, hashtag whatever may be the issue right now. For instance, when last year, and constantly even now, with SARS and everything, just that hashtag, end SARS, raised awareness for it. Sort of starting to form sort of a unity. You started seeing campaigns roll out throughout the whole, internationally, even in the UK, you see people doing protests for what's going back, trying to build up unity. So having that hashtag sort of builds up and sort of brings us closer together in our fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And Marcel, given your expertise, your research in data and science, how do you think social media plays into that community and connect between Black people?
Yeah, definitely. I think what I find very interesting about social media is the fact that while it's also a vehicle for kind of bringing the community together, increasingly it's becoming almost the vehicle for wealth creation as well. It's something that we're beginning to see. So in our kind of report that we were we developed together, one of the major vehicles for that future wealth creation, especially important for the Black community, is having the kind of necessary digital skills to be able to then go and kind of engage properly into the future. And when you see kind of major companies like Facebook, who have now even rebranded purely to Meta, I think that's a beautiful stance in terms of how important social media, or what we could actually describe perhaps as the digital world, how important that is going into the future. And I think for us as kind of a Black community, and also the wider kind of supportive community as well, beyond the Black community, it's so important for us to effectively engage and actually use that tool in a way that is kind of going to shape society for us to go on to do better as well. So I think the major thing from social media I'm really seeing is that it's no longer something that's kind of can be ignored, or is something that is kind of I guess not important, and in fact it's actually increasingly being kind of shaping society as a whole as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Elliot, with your interest and education in investment and finance, and these topics that Black communities have often struggled to break through, whether it's getting loans from banks, whether it's finding the right things to invest in. How do you think social media has played a part in somewhat slightly educating, especially young Black folks, about how to progress?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you made there. It's important to understand that what social media provides is a vehicle for people to have access to information, right? And understand another thing, which is also important, is that one experience, there's an amalgamation of experiences that you can understand. And within the Black community, a lot of the times, with the diaspora being spread around, it becomes very difficult to actually be able to have that melting pot and that understanding of all those different perspectives to see. And when you're looking at something from an investment perspective, right, you want to be able to have enough information to actually make predictions on things and so on and so forth. And social media provides that outlet, right? And in a lot of ways, in countries, in certain countries in Africa, for example, right, it also provides a community sense to be able to have access to this information. In Nigeria, for example, with everything that's been going on with crypto that we see with it being banned and so on and so forth, and the currency devaluation, a lot of individuals took it upon themselves to see, okay, what are the other ways we can get dollars out and so on and so forth. Yeah. And the community on Twitter, for example, was a very big pushing point for that. So yeah, I think it plays a pretty big role.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with investment specifically, like you say, certainly giving individuals an insight, a piece of the crumb. People who have had the privilege to go on and study in great business schools like yourself and learn and gain that education can then, leave crumbs for the rest to follow on and take from. And I think that's what's really great about social media and the legacy beyond hashtags that we can find is that it's not just a hashtag, it's an access point for someone to connect with you and understand your expertise and your understanding, but you put it in a way that's digestible for them. And that's where I'd like to ask you, Naomi, specifically as a co-author of the report, and you're in your studies in Cambridge with international studies and politics. How do you see the social media playing a part, whether it's access to education, access to information, like Elliot mentioned?
So I think what's really great about social media is that it's almost, I always refer to this phrase, and it's talked about in history a lot, as the idea of the victor writes history. So the things we know about society as we change through different epochs and different eras, it's always sort of written from the victor's perspective. And something about social media is that it democratizes this information production system. And so the fact that we can even document a time in society where there is rampant social change, but even stories from the past that have not been well documented or covered, whether it's been the stories of immigrants or migrants coming to this country, the societal structural ills that you faced making that transition, even being able to document it and also bring it up in the moment where obviously it's a global tragedy with things that were happening with George Floyd and multiple things that have happened, but also being able to document these things on social media is a really important moment in history, not only socially, but also politically, because it then means that it can't be ignored. And then you start to track an issue over time. So whether the plight of Black people globally gets covered from this summer to the last summer, and just looking at the difference in change, the difference in social narratives, and seeing whether it's been tracked over time, it's really important to have that information. And I think tying in with the report, something we focused on was like the creation of universalized metrics that actually track the plight of young Black people and also Black people in the workforce today. So it's really difficult if you don't have a metric. If you don't have a metric or measurement, it's great to have stories and individualized experiences. But if you can documentize and like concretize these things in databases and systems, and also measure institutions against one another, whether they're lending to Black people, whether they're fostering Black talent as employers, it is something that can be really powerful and really used really well. So on the social media perspective, it can be really valuable, but also the idea of data and information from hashtags and social media, but also within corporations and institutions, tracking the metrics and the progressions of Black people, not only within institutions, but within educational places, within financial institutions, whether they're being lended to. I think it's a really powerful thing that we should sort of focus on now, and also harness the growth of social media and the digitization of everyday life.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think I want to touch on your point there actually about the metrics that the report considered, the racial equity metrics. Now, Marcel, I'd actually like to touch on that with you. In terms of, the report mentions that often Black people have had to sort of rely on these anecdotal experiences as evidence to sort of spark discourses about the racial issues. And with the report, what you're trying to do is find those employment metrics, those financial metrics, to highlight that there's a way of sort of measuring our racial equity, measuring how far we're progressing. And so how do you think social media has to play a part in that? How do you think, with the report, you can spread it to this younger generation, which is incredibly important given that we have an opportunity that so many people before us didn't have. We have this incredible access to information. We have this incredible power to share with people in seconds, milliseconds even at times. So how do you think, with the racial equity metrics, how important that is? And really, how do you do it essentially? How do you use social media? How do you use these metrics to help us progress?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the major things from the report was trying to introduce this concept of inequality risk, where inequality risk is this kind of risk to society, broader society, not just the Black community, of ongoing kind of inequality, specifically in racial wealth inequality as well. And what we found was that, as we all know, what gets measured is what can be improved or what can be kind of tracked. And because of that, when we kind of tie that back into social media, what that enables us to do is not only spread this concept of inequality risk, but also be able to spread the stories and the metrics around that by leveraging platforms such as social media, because everyone can begin to show actually this is how the kind of the benefits and the kind of negativity that can come from either engaging effectively in kind of diverse communities or in not doing so as well. And I think that's one of the kind of unique things about social media is its ability, as Naomi kind of mentioned as well, to really spread messages across communities instantly, and everyone can really kind of effectively participate in that. So for us, when we think about this kind of concept of inequality risk, it's a really exciting time because we really can recognize how we can now not only spread the knowledge of that kind of concept or that principle, but also spread the kind of stories and also the metrics alongside that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, I think it's very true. And I was really pleasantly surprised with how to the point the report was really. I think it was great in the way that it was concise, but it hit all the relevant points, and it was really digestible. And I think that's one thing we need to focus on in our Black communities, and when we consider sharing with social media, it's the difficulty of different Black communities. We just, one thing I was thinking about when I saw the video, Langford's amazing documentaries of Nigeria, South Africa, etc. The one thing I was thinking is, my God, I don't want to see that go away. I want to see that reshared and kept alive, really. And I think social media is a great way to do that. One of the ways, at least. And so I'd actually like to ask you, Elliot. The report highlights very clearly these problems in wealth gaps and racial wealth gaps, and why that is. And with you in investment and deeply thinking about finance, how would you say young entrepreneurs, especially, of course, Black young entrepreneurs, can sort of can consider the legacies of their predecessors and find the right things to invest in, find the right things to take them forward? Now, I just want to cite something from the report. It said, I think that 48% of Black Caribbeans have their wealth tied up, 48% of their wealth tied up in pensions and pension schemes, incredibly illiquid assets, and that was a problem. So I think, and that also transfers to what you're saying, Marcel, about creating wealth and wealth creation, and also generational wealth. So how would you, Elliot, as someone who's invested, who's succeeded in this finance space, suggest that we use these modern opportunities to sort of uplift ourselves in finance and wealth creation?
Well, I think this is a layered question, right? And I think to overarch it, right, Marcel mentioned inequality risk, which is the theme of this report. Yeah. And COP26 just happened. We're talking about ESG, right? Environmental, social governance. Yeah. That S part is what this inequality risk is focusing on.
Of course,
right?
Yeah.
So this should be in the mind of investors. It is a core part of what people look at. LPs and multiple shareholders are asking for more things to be done from an ESG perspective. And this report and inequality risk feeds into that. And so I think that's the first lens you can look at it from, right? I think the other part, when you talk about investing and so on and so forth, the best investors, it takes time, right? And it's the education, it's having access to mentorship, for example, mentorship programs, and getting people interested in it and understanding that you don't always have to have the most amount of money to be a good investor, right? A lot of it is about strategies, about theory, it's about understanding what works in practice and what works well for you, right? I'm a long-only investor, that's what I enjoy. Some people are day traders, that maybe that's what they enjoy. So there's enough for other people, but you have to be able to have the imagination to do that. And I think bringing it back to the report again, you mentioned the pension schemes and so on and so forth. I'll give you another stat that was also into the report. If you look at actually the amount of people who leave, who don't have they don't have household wealth, so in terms of land and so on and so forth, I think it's around £0, the median household wealth for the Black African and Black Caribbean society. Which means, if today you want to start a business, right, and you don't have all this cash, but you have your house and you want to put it as collateral, well, if you don't have any household wealth, no collateral, no access to loans.
Of course.
Right? That's one thing that's gone. The other part is if you want to also be an entrepreneur, a lot of the time starting out, you have your whole community, you have your parents, your uncles, so on, your friends that give you money. Well, if there's not a pool of community money there to do that, how much risk can you take to innovate, right? You're going to look for something that's probably not as much of a successful business, but something that's probably more cash generative in the short term to fund. And that forces people to hamper their imagination, which in turn doesn't push the envelope of what innovation should be. So you also have that side of things, right? Yeah. And I think those are probably the two main areas from an investment perspective, but also from an investee, so who you're investing in. Because, it's good to be an investor, but at the end of the day, we're investing in things that we hope that can grow, right? And if the entrepreneurs are not giving the tools via our investment, then you're never going to be able to make the return that you're looking for.
Of course. And on entrepreneurial innovation, I think that's a perfect way to put it, and definitely a way that Black people should, or Black communities should look at when they're considering their future investments. And who are you investing in, as you said, and what are we investing in? I think that's incredibly important. And the report did a perfect sort of analysis of showing the different aspects, the educational, the employment, the financial. And Naomi, I want to touch on the social with you, actually. You have your own unique experiences as a Black woman in an incredibly prestigious institution in the University of Cambridge, and through your experiences, what have you seen what has your experience taught you, and what have you seen through the medium of social media that Black communities can benefit from? And with your expertise and going through the Black experience in the University of Cambridge, in these prestigious institutions, Marcel, I'm sure you can relate. How does that feed into your perspective on how we can leave a legacy beyond hashtags?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question. And even now that I've graduated from Cambridge, I also work in finance now. And so it's also not really a space where I see a lot of Black women or a lot of senior people as role models in my career space as well. But what I would say is that my educational experience, I would say, has been pivotal to the way I see the world, to the way I reflect on the Black experience. And I think something that came from it was that I also studied politics and sociology. So I had like both sides of like the macro perspective, but also the social elements that go on underneath the political. And I think what I realized was that the idea of race, racism, ethnicity, colonialism, it's so global and it's so structural. It's really, really complex. And you sometimes don't really grasp that. You think it's a thoughts and feelings type of thing, or, you know, if people would just be nicer, then we could get rid of racism, not understanding the real structural elements that means that capital begets capital. People who have had historic advantages have these advantages, and they may also defend these advantages in ways that are racialized, but they may not even know it's racialized. So if you know, in the medieval centuries, a baron or a landlord annexed a piece of land, to this day you may have someone who's a von something, and this legacy and this wealth creates itself over time. It's very, very established. And I think something about understanding the idea of understanding how global and how structural these things are and how it develops over time, just understanding the complexity has really humbled me. But sometimes it can get people down or think, okay, where do we even start to unpack the idea of race, unpack the idea of wealth generation? But I think it's really simple as looking back at the past and things that have not worked for people, and then things that also do work for people. I think being in spaces that you don't really see a lot of people like you in, I think what it takes is a lot of confidence and courage. Like it really isn't easy. When I first arrived at Cambridge, I didn't know anyone who'd been there. I didn't have loads of friends or a huge network there, but I think it is about being curious and about being resilient in a sense. So really wanting to understand things. If you ask questions, whether you're in Cambridge, whether you're in any university, it's just really understanding questions, keeping on asking questions and being really inquisitive. I think that's something that led me into the career that I'm in now. Even though I have tough days, it's always learning that I have not learnt enough yet that I feel like I can implement. So it keeps me sticking around in these spaces, but also something I would touch on the social media element and the idea that wealth generation is a legacy. We can also create new legacies. So Elliot mentioned the statistic about pensions being the main source of pot of wealth that the Black community hold. But thinking about, okay, in this digitized space, even though, you know, there's inflation and wage suppression, what are the creative ways in which you can invest? Whether it's £50 in a collective investment scheme, whether you can put money away, whether people can start side hustles, like the boom of content generation, especially from the Black community, the Black diaspora, it's created a whole new economy out of nowhere, and people are really listening. In the music industries, the numbers are not lying, and that's also a wealth generation space. It may not be old money, it may not be property, it may not be landed generations and palaces, but it is somewhere to start. And how do we harness and keep this wealth in the community and also create jobs around it? So it's not just an artist who becomes big and makes loads of money. It's the people around them, it's production, it's their investors, it's their accountants. It creates a whole economy and a community within the Black community that we can tap into and create wealth generation, also new entrepreneurial ideas. So it's the idea of there are new avenues that social media is giving us to occupy spaces, whether it be traditional spaces like finance, whether it be a university institution, but it's also opening up places like the music industry, so many different options that are available to us. And also one thing I'd like to touch on, I know I'm talking quite a lot, but I think it's coming back to the interconnectivity of all the ideas of race. So it's great to be people in Western society who are advancing the racial plight of also people like us, but also looking back to the continent, so Africa, the Caribbean. How do we create long-term structures that mean we're not only doing well in a Western society, but we almost create a circular loop where we repatriate back to the countries where we've come from, and also create a loop of wealth generation. So it means that the plight of Black people in the next 20 years will look nothing like what it has looked like in the last 20 years in terms of migration, in terms of the structural economies of our home countries. And that's something that we can really look forward to and harness and think about wealth creation in a different way.
Fantastic answer there. And to wrap up, I'll quickly ask Emzo, as president of the Afro-Caribbean Society, with your responsibility to your peers in your society, and going through the journey you've been from junior counselor to president, how do you see your role in sharing and in your role in social media and looking at all the opportunities we had, and like Naomi is saying, looking at the past and whether it's our collective past, the post-colonial history, and really being able to, at such a young age, translate that to all the young Black students who are trying to learn?
Well, I was president of Afro-Caribbean Society last year, but now I'm part of a new initiative called the African Business Society, and our goal is to try harness and get into our members and our students, our fellow students of the African and Caribbean diaspora, about the opportunities that are there for them and what to do moving forward. Because we found that a lot of people, they in our university, they go, they study, and they have a vague idea of what to do, but they don't know about the opportunities that are there for them. Yeah. They don't know about the programs that are set out there for them. They don't know about the mentors that are willing to offer that helping hand to help them progress and take them further. So we're here. So what we try to do is try to ensure that our members and the people that our members, we try to ensure that they learn about the different opportunities that are there for them, because we as Black people need to know that there are certain issues that we can face that aren't similar to other races and stuff like that. Do you get what I mean? Yeah. So it's all about making sure that we can show them that there's this path for you and there's this support as well, that these people that have been there before you, even before I was talking in the back about how it's the older generation have helped us open these doors for us to walk through. Yeah. And it's ensure that, and it's pivotal that we walk through these doors and we walk through them, making not only just an impression, but making and opening possibly another door for the next generation coming after us. Yeah. To make sure that they can reach those executive levels. Because even when you look at executives in the 50 or 100 companies, how many of those are Black? Yeah. You get what I mean? These are questions we need to ask ourselves. So it's making sure that we can elevate ourselves and motivate ourselves to get to the next stage.
Of course. And just to end off, I know we're slightly running over time, but I wanted to say thank you to all of you for contributing. But more importantly, I loved what Naomi you were talking about there with collective investment schemes. It's really about seeing Black leaders effectively and being able to relate to them. And like you said, Naomi, when you struggle to see those leaders in your space, it may seem hard, but I feel as long as we educate ourselves and research, when I was researching about feminism and carceral critiques of feminism, it was so interesting to see how incarceration was essentially used in the late 70s and 80s of America as an excuse to incarcerate Black women at a faster rate than white women. And it was a very interesting critique. And researching and educating yourself and understanding, and through social media, through the hashtags, clicking on the hashtags, and actually seeing what it leads you to, the scholars, the people that we've had here today. Shaka Hislop talked about how his glass felt half full. Well, I'm focusing on the part that's half empty and what we can do to progress and find the future that's not only good for us, but good for our children and the future generations. And I think the Wealth Creation Report has done a fantastic, concise job of delivering that information for us. And with that, I'd like to close and say thank you to everyone who is live and who's here in the theater for joining us. Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Emzo. Thank you, Marcel. Thank you so much, Elliot. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Oh dear, we have to thank you, Amara, seriously. Please, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together, raise this roof. Amara Otashi, thank you. And I actually feel now, job done, I can go home, because I'm just going to quickly say this, because I was the chair of the African Caribbean Society for University of Northumbria, 1993, and I look at you and I go, you talked about the doors and opening, and absolutely. I was in a car today, a cab. The taxi driver talked to me about Tarquin, as he called him. Tarquin is this white, upper-class student in Newcastle who thinks he's going to rule the world and tell us what to do. Let me tell you right now, yes, we'll have Tarquin, but we've got you, and well, she's gone, and I feel it's going to be safe, it's going to be all right, because these people are going to make sure we're okay, balancing it out. So well done. My God. Black Britain and beyond. There it is. There it is. Wow. You guys can stay if you want to. I would. We've got someone special, or you can go, it's up to you. We've got someone special now for you. Been an MP since 2010. Yes, we know there was economic crisis and all of that, and David Cameron was in number 10. Well, she was on the opposite side, but she's been on the opposite side and in front and challenging up front and central for the last 11 years. It's because we're in 2021. She is an absolute advocate for all of her constituents, and particularly for the African Caribbean community. Please, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for our closing remarks speech by Chi Awara, MP for Newcastle Central.
Thank you so much, Trevor, for that great introduction. And can I just also say what a fantastic panel that was? You know, can I say, as one of the older generation, I learned a huge amount, and I also feel hugely reassured by who's going to be in the leadership positions in our future. So thank you so much for that. And it's been an amazing 4 days, hasn't it? Have I got these on the right way? Yeah. It's been an amazing 4 days. It's been quite incredible. Black British wealth creation, black, beautiful and British, black masculinity, black identity and activism. There has been so much talent. There's been so many ideas. There's been so much shared, so much to explore. I want to thank everyone who participated here and online, but of course particularly those who came to the greatest city in the world, of Newcastle, the historic centre in the struggle for social justice. And I do want to thank particularly obviously our sponsors, the Coca-Cola company, Costa Coffee, Coca-Cola European Partners. I want to thank the impact sponsors, Seedling Foundation, the Executive Leadership Council, and a special thank you to Show Racism, the Red Card. I want to thank our fantastic presenter, Brenda Manus, and also our keynote speakers, Trevor Williams, Cheryl Maybury, McKissick, Andy Mundy Castle, Kit Benman, Gina Yasheri, Marcus Ryder, and Shaka Hislop. In Shaka, I'm in black and white. I'm often in black and white for Newcastle United, but it's particularly an honour to wear that, to wear the black and white in your colour, in your presence. I also want to thank Black Britain and Beyond co-chairs Brian Bonaparte, Richard Etienne and Erica Fremantle, and of course Newcastle University, you know, where we are in this fantastic Frederick Douglass Centre. Newcastle is such a proud part of our civic community here in Newcastle. And of course Keith McGee, the Reverend Professor Keith McGee, global social justice thinker and public intellectual, as well as a professor here at Newcastle University. You know, but I think we should ask ourselves, why did it take an American to inspire such a setting for such important conversations? And I think the answer to that goes to the heart of what identity is. It is so very, very personal, made by us, about us. It is so very, very public, who we are to the world. And it is increasingly so very, very political. A football in the culture wars. So it is impossible to discuss identity without having and taking different perspectives. And sometimes we can get too embroiled in our own perspective. And in some ways, Newcastle is an example of this. As I said yesterday, when people think of Black Britain, they rarely think of Newcastle. Newcastle is only 10% Black and minority ethnic, and yet Newcastle has thriving Black communities, in the plural, the region's first Muslim mayor, and me, the region's first Black member of Parliament. And growing up in Newcastle, I benefited from the fruits of generations of struggle for social justice. Fantastic state schools, great public services, the NHS, a council house, and working class solidarity. I was also told regularly to go back to where I was from, and it was quite clear that in their view, I wasn't from here. And yet Newcastle University had been the only non-American university to honor Martin Luther King in his lifetime. And he came here, he made an amazing speech, a call to arms and for international solidarity in ending racism, poverty, and war. And yet, Frederick Douglass lectured here in Newcastle, not very far away from here, in the 1840s about slavery in America and staying for long periods with a Quaker family, Anna Richardson's family, who raised the money necessary to buy Frederick's freedom. And when he returned to America in 1847, he wrote to Anna Richardson saying, I now have my manumission papers in my possession. I landed on your shores a slave. I came back a free man. And yet South Shields has the oldest Somali community in the country, and a mosque where, as I remember as a kid, Muhammad Ali came to have his wedding blessed. And yet I was regularly the subject of many racist attacks. And as a working class Northern Irish Nigerian girl, I had quite a lot of identity to figure out. And I would say it took me a while to do so, if I'm there yet. And I'd also say it wasn't helped by Black men telling me I had to prioritize my race over gender, white women telling me the inverse, and self-declared class activists telling me it was all a matter of my class. As I said yesterday, I knew first and foremost and always that I was and I am a Geordie. I'm immensely proud of that. And having that strong grounding in a local identity helped me immensely. So when I put myself forward, because that's what you have to do, to be the Labour candidate for Newcastle Central and was told Newcastle wasn't ready for a Black MP, and Geordies would vote on race grounds, well, I knew better. And in 4 consecutive elections, the people of Newcastle Central have demonstrated that what they care about is the party I represent, Labour, and how well I represent them. Every single constituent, that's who I represent, as their voice and their representative in our representative parliament. And today I had the great honour, the real privilege of representing them in our service of remembrance. A Christian bishop, a Jewish faith leader, a Muslim imam all spoke. A reminder that people of all faiths and all races sacrificed their lives for Britain as it is today. That is their legacy. And it is up to us to build upon the freedoms they fought for to create a legacy of empowerment, which is the theme of our symposium. Particularly for the Black British children building their identity identities today. Because it is an interesting time to be Black and British. Well, to be honest, it's always an interesting time to be Black, but it is an interesting time to be Black and British. If we think about this millennium, and we saw the election of Obama, the first black president of the most powerful nation in the world, who was called by some the first post-racial president. Do you remember that term, post-racial? How long did post-racial last? Trump had something to say about it. White supremacists had something to say about it. And then George Floyd could not breathe, and Black Lives Matter had something to say about it. And here we have a conservative government for over a decade now, a government with black and brown secretaries of state who uses the diversity of their platform, the diversity of their cabinet as part of a platform to argue that structural racism does not exist in this country, as the Sewell report claimed. Even though black and minority ethnic lives were lost and are being lost so disproportionately during the COVID pandemic. And then looking forward, and I'm the Shadow Minister for Digital, I'm a chartered engineer, I've spent a lot of time working in technology, 20 years in fact, and I'm horrified to see the way in which algorithms are increasingly embedding and automating the racism which does exist in all our lives. So what does that teach me? It teaches me that we must always be going forward, otherwise we will go backwards. That black and brown people in leadership is important, but it's not sufficient. We have to be accountable. We have to be accountable to Black Britons in all our diversity. And that is not enough to be fighting against racism. We have to be fighting for something. And that brings us up to another challenge, because we know racism does exist, structurally, institutionally, in our lived experiences, implicitly and explicitly. But race as a biological reality does not exist. And so forging an identity for Black Britons, which is positive and something that we are holding up with pride, not simply in antithesis to the racism and the oppression and the struggle that we all see all too often, without a definition of race, is a challenge. And that's why Black Britain and beyond is so important. That's why the conversations that we've been having these last 4 days are so critical. They have to be challenging, and they have been challenging. They have to be broad, and they have been broad. We have to hear from different voices and from different places, not simply talking to ourselves about ourselves, but talking to others about ourselves and about themselves. It's the stories that we say to ourselves, it's the voices that we hear, which have to define ourselves, each in our own way. Now, I am proud to be a Geordie, very proud. I'm proud to be a feminist. I'm proud to be of Nigerian heritage. I'm proud to be of Irish heritage. I'm proud to be working class. I am proud to be a member of Parliament. I'm incredibly proud to be a Black Briton. I define that my way. We need to grow our confidence in how we share what our identities are and how we use that as our legacy of empowerment for a better and brighter and more equal future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chi Owora, MP for Newcastle South, Newcastle Central, Labour MP, let me get it in there, Labour. So look, that's just about more or less it for the symposium. We've had 4 days, we've had lots of great conversations, but really holding that space for us has been a wonderful woman. In many ways an inspiration beyond what she knows in terms of who she connects with. She is a cultural entrepreneur, she is a social ambassador, and she's been your moderator and presenter over the last 4 days. So what you're going to do right now is show your love and make some noise for the wonderful Brenda Amanis.
Stay with me. Thank you so much. It has been an absolute honor to be fronting this symposium for the last 4 days. I want to say a huge thank you to Chi for that, those amazing and inspiring closing words. To my partner in crime for today, Trevor, you've been absolutely awesome. A real energy and a real spirit, and I needed you today, boy. I needed you today. So thank you. And equally important to the formidable young panel we had ending our series. It really gives all of us oldies hope for the future. You know when they say the future's so bright, you gotta wear shades? Well, man, it's so true. It is so true. So thank you guys so much, so much. Don't underestimate your power, please. Please, 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 I beg of you. We've had discussions, we've had debates, we've had insights, we've had conversations, we've had thought provocation. We've had it all in just 4 days. And it fills me with so much pride and confidence that things are going to be okay. Somehow things are going to be okay. We couldn't have done this without our sponsors. So once again, I'd like to reiterate, thank you so much. You know, nothing gets done without the dollars, right? So thank you to Coca-Cola, thank you to Costa, thank you to Newcastle and all the hospitality we've had. Every person, our technical team, everyone that's helped us, make sure that we had coffees, everyone who's brought us ideas. Thank you so much. And then we've got so much gratitude, but none of it would have happened without that happening. Our panels have been superb, absolutely superb. You've given us so much to think about, so much to be inspired by, so we're truly grateful to you. If you've missed any of it, because it's easy to do, we all lead busy lives, you can watch it all again on YouTube or the Black Britain Beyond website. I'll just remind you again, day 1 was wealth creation, where we had insights from a new report which highlighted how access to information, education, and opportunities is vital for our economic empowerment. Day 2 was about beauty, the beauty industry, how that can empower and disempower Black women. We also looked at about mental health and kindness, with men talking about kindness. It was just so insightful. Day 3, we looked at Black masculinity. We had a superb panel that highlighted some lived experiences, which left me with so much to think about. And today, of course, it was all about activism and Black identity. So we've done a lot, but there's a lot more to do. And we can't do that without your support. So all I'm asking, if you've watched it and you've been inspired, tell your friend, to tell your friend, to tell your auntie, to tell your uncle, to tell your granddad. You get the message. Yeah. We need the support for us to be able to do this again next year, to get the message across, to collaborate, to see some progress, not just in Black Britain, but in the world, throughout the diaspora. We need you. So all I can say is, merci beaucoup. It's been a real gas and a real privilege to do this. We love you all. Thank you. Good night.